Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Matthew Karnichnik.
Okay, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We've saved the best for last. I know it's been a long day, but I think this is going to be an interesting panel, especially for people from this region. We're talking about this region, its future within Europe, and as a group, as the Visegrad 4. Our panelists today, I think you know most of them. I will briefly introduce them. We have Ivan Korchok, the State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Bratislava.
Yeah, hello. Good evening.
And to his right, we have Martin Stropnický, the Deputy Prime Minister, who's also the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Czech Republic. On the far left, we have Martin Czaputowicz, the Foreign Minister of Poland. And on the far right, just in the seating order, we have Levente Magyar, the Minister of State from Hungary at the Foreign Ministry there. As you know, this is a very interesting time in Central Europe. I won't say an exciting time. There's been a lot happening in various countries around the region. Today we want to talk about the Visegrad 4, but also its relationship with Europe, where this relationship is going, and what it all means both for these individual countries and for the European Union itself and the future of the European Union. And I think I would like to start with that question, and I will welcome your questions as well later on. We only have 60 minutes, so I'm going to try to devote as much time as possible to questions from the audience, so please get those questions ready. We're also going to have a Slido poll, and you can ask your questions as in the other sessions today via Slido as well. I think I would like to start with Deputy Prime Minister Stropnický on this question of the future of the Visegrad 4. Your Prime Minister was here earlier today, and from talking to people who listened to what he had to say, he left the impression, I think, in many people's mind that the Czech Republic is taking a somewhat more Eurosceptic view of the EU and on issues including the Eurozone, on Schengen. At one point he said there was no logic to Schengen. These are statements that aren't really consistent with what we hear from other parts of the Visegrad group, obviously, but also the EU. So my question to start with you is, how do you see the Czech Republic's relationship vis-a-vis the EU evolving in the coming years, given the position of your Prime Minister and your government?
Yeah, as usually, thank you for the question. No, but good afternoon to everybody, and I have a high degree of admiration. If some of you have been here since the morning, maybe deserve a golden medal, but we will try definitely with my colleagues not to bore you. And to respond to the question again in a soft way, it's maybe a kind of division of labor, the tough policeman and the soft one. I am the soft one. So I will talk about V4 in this manner, and it doesn't mean that it's not the characteristic of our policy or our view vis-à-vis European Union. I don't think we are skeptical, maybe we are rational. So if there is something in the European policy which doesn't work, we have the tendency and even the right and duty to say so. Of course, it's not good to be the Mr. No. It's always good to give some alternatives and proposals. Maybe in the past the Czech Republic was the Mr. No, but definitely now, and this, or even I would say the next government, which is to be formed in a couple of few weeks, will maintain this direction and this track. So if, for example, the famous quotas, if they do not work, well, it's maybe honest to say it and to come with something else. If we are talking about 2 speeds or many speeds in Europe, it's maybe good to define what's exactly the speed of what. Because sometimes we are, let's say, there is a tendency to put us in the lower speed Europe, but we have the lowest unemployment in Europe. We have a growth which is high above the average. And I think all of us, we have a very good economic record right now, above the European average. So, of course, there are other sectors when we still have to do our homework, so to speak. But we are not skeptical. There is no alternative. Of course, we want a strong and a capable Europe. From time to time, we have the impression that the bureaucracy of Europe is too strong, it's too far away from the citizen, talking about this issue for years and years, but not changing anything. For me, the Commission is doing political business, which maybe should be given exclusively to the Council, to the Prime Ministers, and the Commission should be a technical body, much more than a political one. If the Commission decides, for example, now we are talking about the enlargement on the Western Balkans, I don't think that the Commission should decide. The Prime Ministers should decide, the countries, with their mandate from the elections. So many issues. I don't want to go into detail.
Well, but ultimately, it will be the countries that decide. It seems that the real divide here, though, when people are talking about your views, your country's views of Europe versus some of the countries in Western Europe, is that there's a difference in the sense of what the core European values are. Do you think that your country and that the V4 now share the same fundamental values as countries such as France and Germany? Because this is the fundamental question, I think, that people are asking, especially when they listen to Prime Minister Babiš.
Yeah, but certainly I think that the basic values of the so-called Western civilization are absolutely not in question. It's no doubt about it. And there might be some slight differences in perception. I don't want to talk or speak on behalf of my colleagues. They will express it themselves, but of course the state of law, of course the free media, of course even if the media are sometimes difficult to swallow for any politician, but despite of that, they must be free, no doubt about it. And the main 4 values, the European achievement, free movement, this is something to be protected, of course, but there are still many barriers in terms of goods. I mean, in terms of wages, for example, in terms of taxing, for example. So there are many issues, but these issues, let's take them as an opportunity, not as an obstacle. Okay.
I'd like to bring in Ivan Korčuk into this. Your country, Slovakia, is one that has in recent years sort of stood out as being maybe more pro-European reform. You're obviously members of the Eurozone. You're a bit of an outlier within the Visegrad group. How do you see this dynamic now within the Visegrad 4? Is it still a coherent group pursuing common goals, or are you growing apart? Do you share the same values? The same question to you.
Well, I think everywhere where we can identify common interest, and we are trying to find common strategy how to pursue and protect that interest. We follow that pragmatically. I think V4 is recognized in a way, and it is seen as a platform where we rarely have a conflict, but the modus operandi in order to avoid conflict is simply that we are not following those issues which are dividing us. So I think pragmatically we are trying to establish certain cohesion amongst us, identify the issues where we can achieve together much more as we would achieve individually. And you are right, when the discussion in this country started about our place in Europe, then maybe Slovakia out of 4 countries was the most outspoken about Europe, where deeper integration is needed. And I'd like to say that for us it is a natural being country with common currency, and we don't think that we can continue with unfinished job in the Eurozone. So logically, our instinct is that everywhere where we need to go for more integration, there is not that in this country I haven't seen a ideological obstacle for going deeper, but we are also not the ones who are providing for European Union a blank check. So everywhere where somebody says we want more integration, Slovaks would follow. That's definitely not the case. So pragmatically, we say more integration in Eurozone. We say yes, you can't be half pregnant, I think, in Eurozone, which is the case at this moment. Do we need more integration or more cooperation or more Europe when it comes to defense? Yes, we do. And I think we share it as a Visegrad country in this particular area. Is it more integration where we continue with completing internal market, where we try to eliminate protectionist measures? I think it is more Europe. So we Slovaks are pragmatic, and we are trying within Visegrad group to get us together everywhere where we can, because we believe 4 of us we are stronger than we would be individually, and for the smallest country in Visegrad, this is our leverage. But as I say, and we will be following this principle when we take over presidency in July, we will not be pushing our colleagues in the areas where we obviously cannot find common ground, and that's why the external perception of V4 is as a platform which is effective.
Minister Čeputovič, this is a position I think that we don't often hear from Poland, that we need more integration. Your government has been on a confrontation course really with the EU Commission recently. How do you view as a representative of the largest country in the V4, how do you view the V4? What is it good for these days when you hear these descriptions of what it should be doing?
Yes, I think it is very important, so to say, framework of cooperation between countries which share common history, communism, and even earlier common or similar geopolitical situation. It means we share the same, to a certain extent, threat perception. We have similar level of development, economic development. We joined the European Union at the same time. Therefore, I can say that we can similar interest vis-à-vis the European Union. We just realized in discussion among us that our interests are very, very, very similar due to these, so to say, circumstances I just mentioned. So we are together now discussing with the European Union future budget, and we are in the group of friends of the structural policy. So we realized that if we are together, then we can pursue our interest more successfully. But let me refer also to the issue of values. You mentioned that we are discussing some issues with European Commission. When I look at the values, European values, so first of all, these are 4 freedoms. Movement of capital, movement of goods, movement of services, and of persons. And another issue, it is economic competition. So this is a liberalism. So these are liberal values. Now I think all our countries defend these very European liberal values against threat, which is protectionism. Western countries, some of Western countries want to defend their economies, and then impose barriers of freedom of movement of workers or services. Posted Workers Directive is an example. So I see our countries as a group of countries which defend very liberal values. So I would say that we represent liberal economy in our system, and we defend it against protectionist democracies. We are liberal democracies and there are protectionist democracies. So this is a discussion about the future of Europe. Of course, I am aware that you can define differently liberalism, that it is not connected with these very economic issues, freedoms, but some protectionist ideas, very left-wing. And in that, when you use that definition, we are definitely not liberal because we are more Christian and more, so to say, conservative. But I do not agree with the opinion that liberal democracy is somehow threatened in our part of Europe. In Poland or Hungary, it's another example. To the contrary, we defend liberal democracy against this protectionist democracy, presented in different way, of course, due to, so to say, some political circumstances. So this is when you, and there's another very important issue concerning divisions in Europe. Sometimes it is presented that the division is between Eurozone countries and the countries do not belong to Eurozone. So among us, one country chosen Euro as a currency. I don't think it is the main dividing line in Europe currently. The main dividing line is between these two groups, countries which develop economically quicker. They defend this competition, and this is the reason why they develop better, quicker. So when you look at the rate of development in our countries, it is currently more than 4%, whereas in other Europe it is about 2%. So when we defend these liberal values, then we contribute to the growth of the European Union, economic growth, and then to its better position in the world. So our party is for strong Europe, united Europe, integrated Europe, and we think that we contribute to the development of Europe and to better world than some of our, so to say, counterparts from Western Europe. They should rather concentrate on reforming their states because all Europe is weaker because lack of this reform. Then try to defend themselves through imposing barriers to these very fundamental liberal freedoms within the European. So it would be our position.
Do you see a future for your country within the Eurozone?
I think it is possible, but yes, it is very possible. So it depends, of course, if it is good for Eurozone and for Poland. But it is not the most important dividing feature in Europe. In first group of countries I defend, I can enumerate some of them. The Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Sweden, Hungary. These are engines of the European development because they apply these liberal values, I mean for freedoms, economic competition. On the other hand, and at this time I will not name them, there are countries who develop not so well, and they need badly need reform of the countries, and they are mainly countries from Western and Southern Europe within the Eurozone. But it is a dividing, so the currency, it's not a main dividing line. The main dividing line is, do you contribute to better and to the development of the European Union, or you are an obstacle as a country? This is the main question. But other things is, currency is a secondary importance in this sense.
I would like to come back to this question of liberal values with you, Levente Magyar. I think most people would respectfully disagree with the minister that Hungary is a country that supports the sort of traditional values of liberal democracy and so forth. In fact, your Prime Minister Viktor Orban recently said that the sort of era of liberal democracy is coming to an end. How do you sort of square this circle where you are in a European Union that was founded on the basis of liberal democratic values. You appear to be moving into a completely different direction in terms of the way the country is structured, the power that the Fidesz party has amassed, and the influence that it exercises over media and other sectors. How do you see Hungary's future within this European Union?
I was expecting this question to come up, but with full honesty, I wasn't expecting it to be right on the first question, but I will be very happy to address it.
I'd like to keep things interesting.
Sure. Let's get started. I think that talking about such notions is a distraction from the real issues. And our Prime Minister did say what you just mentioned, but in a totally different way than how it was interpreted in most of Europe or among most of our partners. What we are saying is that a democracy does not necessarily have to be liberal in terms of the value set that a political group or a country holds close to heart, in the sense that why couldn't a democracy be a Christian democratic democracy or a conservative democracy? Liberalism is, in this sense, implies a set of values that we don't necessarily agree with, but not regarding the fundamental values that market and the functioning of the state are built upon. So I think that we should make a very clear distinction in that. But I would also like to point out that as I see the rest of your questions that you posed, I see a great deal of tendentiousness and bias already at the point of departure. When you say, what's the relationship of the V4 with Europe? Your question does simply not make sense because we are Europe. Or when you talk about Euroscepticism, it doesn't make sense because none of us are Eurosceptics. We might be Eurocritics at some points, but it's not because we are questioning the basic framework of the European Union. We want to better it because we have a strong conviction that if Europe is stronger, we are stronger. It's only a question of ways how to get to that stronger Europe. So to conclude my first remark, I would just like to underline that using some terms and expressions, I think really mark the way how some outsiders approach the V4 and Central Europe and sort of still live in the era when we're talking about real Europe or old Europe and these newcomers that are making trouble. So please let's be more objective.
New Europe, I think it was. Some people meant that as a compliment. That's a great segue to our Slido poll question, which everyone can vote on here. It's a multiple choice question. Europe's current east-west divide will lead to, number one, an acceleration of a two-speed Europe. Number two, a return to more intergovernmental decision-making. Three, the dissolution of the EU as we know it. And four, all of the above. As people are voting on that, I would like to come back to you, Minister Stropnicki, on the question of what can be done to repair this divide. I don't think there's a lot of question about the fact that things have gotten worse between some of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe and the Western countries. But what can be done to fix that in your view?
I would maybe add to what my colleague just said, that we don't really like this division of Easterners and Europeans, or how should I call it. It's definitely over. We are a market which is quite interesting for the big ones as well. We export, as Czech Republic, 83% of our products to the EU and more than a third of this to Germany. We altogether, I don't know whether 50 or more than 50 million people that we represent together it's a huge market with a certain capacity, which is quite interesting for the producers. So we are, I would not say we are the economic burden. And
yes, but with respect, I think the point is not so much the economic links, which are undeniable and are very important, but it's this question of values. What kind of values do the governments in the region today represent? And I think a lot of people look at what has happened in recent years in Poland, in Hungary, even most recently in Slovakia with the murder of my journalist colleague Jan Kuciak, and wonder what direction is this region going. And I think this is the real issue.
Yeah, but the real issue is not to divide or separate this problem from similar or comparable problems in other countries. We have a certain AfD party in Germany, which is quite strong. We have a certain coalition partner, the Free Party in Austria. Why don't we talk about this? And it's not a nasty remark, it's just objective. So, you know, it's not only the problem of this or that country. I think the value of V4, among others, is we are not a military structure and everybody is, has the same opinion on anything. We have some slight accents in this or that, but we are able to meet and to talk and to exchange views, even to say, let's say, between tête-à-tête, so to speak, even things which maybe would be more difficult to spell out in a broader audience, and that's something useful, so something that has value. It's not a small union within the big union. It's just a group of states sharing a lot of common experience from the past and from the history, and painful history very often. So it makes sense. I think that the basic values, again, to come back to your question, are fully shared. Of course, sometimes one, under the title of one value, may see some slight differences in details. And some details might be important, I agree. But this still gives the ground for some common discussion, and we cannot just do it, you know, after any elections to just change it or switch. Or to, the elections, democratic elections, bring some political representations with a clear mandate. It can be closer to your opinions or more distant from your opinions, but it still has to remain a partner. That's important.
I would like to just inform you of the results of the poll, which are pretty clear here to the panelists who can't really see it unless you crane your head. A majority of the audience found that a return to more intergovernmental decision making is the most likely outcome. Minister Čaputovič, what is your view of that? Would that be a good outcome? It seems that is something that Poland would welcome. A smaller role for the Commission and Brussels?
I think it is possible, I would say also. But why is it so? Let me just also refer to just the last words of Martin. Okay, I represent Law and Justice Party. When I had an expose in Parliament, I defended strong, united Europe. And opposition was also very much pro-European to our government. In Poland, 87% of society is pro-European integration. I think it is a feature of our region, so we are very much pro-European. It has very important implications. We are for parliamentary traditional democracy because we are pro-European, or almost all persons in parliament. So we can discuss future of Europe in parliament. Whereas proposal of President Emmanuel Macron is to conduct discussion, to have discussion on conferences. I would call it as a kind of a deliberative democracy, to discuss issue with already convinced, to exclude people who are against. I understand why, because opposition to European integration in France, it was mentioned Germany, but particularly Italy, Hungary, other countries. So there is a very strong opposition to European integration. It is a danger for the European Union, but this danger is in Western Europe, not in Eastern Europe. So we are talking about values. Another interesting feature is, how do you understand democracy? I said, we are liberal democracies, meaning democracy is a rule of people, so to say. But whereas the proposal is to impose will of elites on people, exclude some persons. So this is very interesting discussion. Maybe it's different, it is presented in the opinion, but we are very much attached to the idea of democracy. Therefore, we think also that European Union has to have legitimacy, and it takes this legitimacy from the people, from parliaments. Parliaments should have a say in discussion about future of Europe. It is not a problem for us. It is very democratic approach. And also governments as a result of the election. So you have the result that, yes, more intergovernmental, but legitimate, with the acceptance of society, of population. If not, Brexit is an example what happens, and there is a threat to the European Union in Western countries.
One of the big issues that's being discussed now in the EU, obviously, and just this week in Sofia, is the question of expansion of the EU. I think all of you tend to favor expansion. There's been some resistance again in Western Europe, particularly in France, to accelerating this process. My question, maybe we can start with you, Ivan Korczok. Do you think that's a mistake, number one? And do you think that this region is partly to blame for the sense that we need a longer waiting period because of the way it has developed in terms of its democratic institutions in recent years?
Can I still have one word on the theme which we've been discussing before? And first, I'd like to say that the problem, in my view, is that the so-called East-West divide is taken as something which has become a general truth, as if it was given that it is there. I am absolutely against it, and I've been on many occasions for at least 2 years or 3 years trying to explain how dangerous it is to portray the situation within the European Union that we have seen recently, that it could be identified or perceived as an East-West divide. I find it very dangerous approach. For those who are following the developments in the EU and in the region, remember, when did the whole talk about East-West divide started? If I remember correctly, it was right at the moment when the four Visegrad countries, have so vocally denied the idea of mandatory quota relocation of migrants. I think the western part of Europe, and I'm not criticizing it for that, stood in a shock that all of a sudden 4 countries who have been behaving always stood up and said, no, not with us. And I think for those in the western part of Europe who still have not digested the fact that we have become members of European Union, this was the evidence that we have delivered, that in that critical moment, in that divisive, on that divisive issues, we had courage, or we dared say no. And immediately the whole discussion started, yes, because this is a problem with values, and you're not showing solidarity. And immediately an equation was established where we are sending money, and in this moment you are denying to show solidarity. Then later on, there were other divisive issues, and posting of workers. I don't want to bother the audience with this, but this was extremely important issues where again the 4 countries of Visegrad have shown a very firm position. But I don't think that we can describe the situation as an East-West divide. And yes, with permission, and I hope you would understand my point, yes, of course, what plays into it, into those perceptions in the western part who have not digested the enlargement, it plays into their argumentation, the current exchange about judiciary system in Poland and other issues of rule of law in Hungary. So it serves it is adding on those arguments.
Were you happy with the result of the Sofia summit?
So you didn't want me to talk about that because you're coming immediately back. Well, there was no result. There was no. I was in Sofia, but there was no result because no results were foreseen. But this was important because 15 years after Thessaloniki, you remember where the European perspective was promised to those countries. We have gathered in Sofia, and I think countries of the Western Balkans, of course, they've been looking at the summit with huge expectations. But we've been telling them that this is not the moment where decisions will be taken. The message that the 28 member states have been bringing across to them was, well, continue with the reforms, because with each and every piece of reform which will help modernize your country, you're getting closer to us. But at the same time, countries like the V4, all of them who spoke, we clearly said that once those countries make progress, we cannot keep the door closed for them, because it would be major mistake when they go back and their citizens see, well, those are the painful reforms and still you are promising, but when it comes to opening chapters, there has been an established rule that whatever progress, just 2 chapters will be opened. So I think at the end, for some of them, certainly it could be disappointing, but more important will be certainly the outcome of Council negotiations and the decisions that we will take later this year in June, where we will say whether we are going to open negotiations with Macedonia once they agree on a name with Greece, and they're making major progress on that, and whether we can start negotiations with Albania, but I see it completely open at this moment. But the last, very last point on this, I think we in European Union tend to underestimate how important it is that those countries from the Western Balkans still do not see any other alternative but to become members of European Union. We've been going through crisis. The picture that we have portrayed about ourselves was not that positive over the last 10 years. But still those countries and the prime ministers who spoke so that there is no alternative. We want to be like you. I think this is encouraging for us.
Thank you. I would like to go to the audience in just a moment. And first I'd like to take one of the Slido questions. We've received quite a few. This one is directed at Levente Magyar, or Hungary in general, not you personally. And the question is, how can a Christian democracy be against taking up refugees in order to save lives, which is obviously one of the big questions that your government has faced in recent years?
I will be happy to answer, but I cannot stand picking up the thread after Ivan and making just one last comment on the previously discussed issues. I think that one of the main reasons why there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of misperception and perhaps reservation vis-a-vis the V4 or Central Europe by many of our friends and allies is the vastly different historic experience that we share, and also the incapacity or the unwillingness of some of our friends to want to understand our historic experience and the differences that arise from these differences in history. If we look at the Balkan issue, for example, but we can also talk about migration, but if you look at the Balkan, the question of the extension of the European Union into the Western Balkans, our countries know the Balkans. We were part of one state 100 years ago, or a bit more than 100 years ago, when 2 Balkan wars erupted and World War I erupted in that region, and we were very close witnesses to what was going on there, partly because of the same root causes in the 1990s. And some of our friends in Western Europe don't have that direct experience, don't see the complexity of Balkan politics, and I think that that's also a factor in the different perception of this issue. As for the refugee question, what we have been saying for the past years is that help should be taken to those in need where they are, and the problems should not be imported to Europe, because we will be overwhelmed by the problems if we import all of them. And Hungary has launched a program of helping those in need in the regions where they are. It's a program called Hungary Helps, and we have been spending tens of millions of euros just in the past years taking assistance to those in need in Iraq, in Syria, in Turkey. And we are very much present in these regions, building hospitals, relocating migrants, etc. And I would also like to add that Hungary has never suspended the practice of taking refugees. We have taken more refugees last year than many Western European countries, because there is a very strong misunderstanding in this sense. Hungary has never closed its gates to those that are actually in need of help and that are seeking a refugee asylum with justified causes. We have only closed the gates of the country to those who want to enter illegally and without using the proper channels of entry into Hungary and thereby into the European Union.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take a question from the audience now. We had a question right here. We'll get you the microphone. Do we have a microphone? One coming. You want to stand up? Oh, you have it already. Sorry.
Good evening, Milan Nič, previously with GLOBSEC Policy Institute, now at German Council of Foreign Relations, DGAP in Berlin. In an effort to move this debate from stereotypes, I would like to ask two questions. One, about Iran. You are sitting at FAC, where Iran is hotly discussed. What do you expect in the next half a year in transatlantic relations and in what Iran will be doing after conversations you had with the Iranian foreign minister? And number two,
we haven't had it. It is as simple as it is.
The three countries and Federica Mogherini. But what do you expect? I mean, you are representing member states. Now, my second question is about the agenda for EU institutions until the end of the cycle. What do you expect? What issues are top on your list to be finished? And I give you one example, if I may. And I will try not to get back to stereotypes. On asylum reform, where member states are divided not on East-West divide. There are important other divisions. It seems that Germany and Bulgarian presidency want to close this question. This will be on the agenda of June summit. But I read Prime Minister Orbán interview in the radio where he argued that it's not right to try to close the asylum reform now, because one should wait for European Parliament elections. These will be the first elections since 2015 crisis. So what are the opinions around the table on this? Should the EU Council try to close?
Okay, why don't we... Do you want to... Who wants to take that?
Iran?
Yes.
Take Iran.
Who is the lucky man to have Iran?
Yes, take Iran.
I can try Iran. You will do it?
No, maybe just a couple of words. Yeah, it's a Nobel Prize question. What will happen in Iran? Frankly, we have supported the last EU position. In the same time, we don't think that the preoccupation of Israel and United States as well, and the evidence they have that everything is not absolutely correct as far as the nuclear program is concerned, are not neglectable. And many countries have their economic interests not to put any embargo on Iran. So maybe, you know, the flexibility of approach is maybe a bit influenced by these economic interests. And we have, and that's what is even in our response to Brussels, that we support, okay, but we miss at least a couple of words about the ballistic missiles program, which is on the way in Iran very actively. So, okay, the ammunition has stopped for a time being, let's hope, but the vehicle is being produced or being engineered right now. So it's a bit of, unfortunately, typical Brussels hypocrisy to say that it's all right like this. I don't think.
But do you think, just to jump in on this question, I remind you and the audience, we're going to get to some more questions. We only have another 15 minutes. But just briefly, do you feel that as of E4, that your relationship towards the United States at the moment is different than the rest of the EU's? And this might be particularly a question for Minister Čaputovič.
As far as a moment about a word about Iran, so we generally, there was a discussion in Foreign Affairs Council, and there was a position accepted by all member states that we would support 3 countries, and their discussion with leaders, with the President Trump. Decision was as it was, so we are in very uncomfortable position. We still are within the European Union. I discussed the issue with Federica Mogherini. We support, but we also have to understand decision taken by the United States, namely the very negative role of Iran in the region. It is related to the relations with the United States. But let me answer your second question. What is the most important issue on the agenda? I think it is coming the Nord Stream 2. It is very crucial issue, and it is dividing line, because we could demonstrated solidarity against Russian aggressive behavior during the Skripal case, when almost all countries expelled, showing solidarity with the United Kingdom Russian diplomats. And now, continuing this, so to say, Nord Stream 2 program is something which is not understandable in the situation. Either you treat Russia as an aggressor, and we agreed, and there are some sanctions, and at the same time you would like to conduct normal business, so to say. So it will be a very divisive issue and crucial issue for the future of the unity of the European Union.
When you say divided, you mean between Poland and the V4 countries and
I think we are
Germany
together.
or Brussels?
The particularly okay. Yes, you can just also within the European Union, because now the decision is okay. The project is going on. German companies conduct normal, so to say, operation. We are closer to the United States. There is a declaration that it would be not a good decision, taking into account the role of Russia in Europe and diversification of energy supply, very negative. We, I think, all our countries share this common view that you have to be tough towards Russia. Why is it so? Why we have similar position? Because, as I said, we have common history. We have common history of relations with the Soviet Union. We are in the Central Europe. There is a revisionist policy of Russia. And if it goes on, we could be a victim. So threat perception. So we understand. And also, we are talking about values. Very good question. We have to defend European values. We have to show solidarity with Ukraine. We cannot allow to give the Russians another leverage to blackmail Ukraine. And we are talking about European values. Yes, we think that Western Balkan states have simply right to be in the European Union. We should accept them. We should not, like France, you said, very pro-Western value. No. Wait. Yeah. So values, ethics in internal and consistency in international relations, it is something which differ our countries from some of countries who accuse us for breaking or not standing up to European values. So completely opposite as it is presented.
Thank you. I would like to take another question from the audience, rather, if there is one. Yes, here in on the far right.
Well, one question on the French ambassador in Slovakia. I take no quiz interested to assess proposal of Mr. Macron, and Mr. Macron as one of the greatest danger for EU integration, as the Polish minister said. At least we put proposals to try to improve the EU on the table. I would be very interested to hear what are the Polish proposal or proposal of your countries to improve, to reinforce European Union and make it more fit to the challenges we have. all of us in globalization. I think it was a question of a new treaty, which, as we can imagine, is very difficult to make possible. So I'm very interested to have your views and proposals.
Does anyone have any views and proposals on reforming the EU? We could spend all day talking about that question, but maybe just 3 quick points if anyone has. Mr. Kochok?
There was a question on Dublin. We haven't touched upon that. Milan asked, I think, a very important question, but I can talk about it for quite some time. But on President Macron's, well, I don't want to take specifically any of his points, but I want to say on the record, I think this is very good news that he ran and he won his campaign on a very pro-European narrative. We are talking all the time about Central Europe and values and rule of law kind of stuff, but remember just 1.5 years ago there were questions, you know, who wins in France. I think Europe would have looked differently if there was other outcome of elections there. So therefore, Ambassador, you see me very often, you know, where we are supportive of not everything, but we are supportive of steps by which we can complete Eurozone. But we cannot go, you know, into fiscal integration unless we complete banking union, and I can continue like that. But for me, it is politically, it is very important at this moment that we have a representative of France, which is pro-European. He won. He has defeated somebody who wanted to take France out of Europe, and I think this is a great moment. The problem at this moment are not the proposals of President Macron. The problem is the sort of complacency that unfortunately I see within the European Union, because we've been talking about what steps should be taken in the future for quite some time. Yesterday we had a meeting with him, of our Prime Minister, with President Macron, and we've discussed Eurozone, and I told him, President, I think Europe needs yet another crisis in Eurozone. Otherwise we are not in a position on our own to take difficult steps for Eurozone. But he didn't agree with me, and he said, no, it must not be that we only act when we are driven by the crisis. We have to act on our own and lead Europe. So once again, not everything I can subscribe to. Of course, Slovakia, as I said at the outset, we are not providing a blank check for everything that others see as a response.
Of course not, but you're about to take over the V4 leadership in the coming months. I think the question was more, what concrete proposals do you have? What would you like to see happen in Europe as a V4?
Yes, absolutely. But then this is a seminar just with me.
I mean, you as the V4, I mean, Slovakia will be taking. You must know the
yes, look, first thing that we need in Europe is to understand that we cannot come up with the proposal about European Union's future unless we deal with the difficult legacy that we have inherited over the last 10 years. I think it's naive to believe that we can just jump over into more integration unless we resolve the migration challenge with the reform of Dublin, and there are major disagreements still in there, but we need to get closer together on it. We cannot find a credible recipe for Europe's future unless we complete Eurozone. We cannot convince our people that European Union can protect their interests unless we are becoming a global player with influence, and our foreign policy is not there. And I could continue like this. I'm not saying that during Slovak presidency, you know, Visegrad will have agreement on all of this. But legacy, first of all, and everywhere where we can get added value to our citizens, we are ready for that.
I think that everybody knows what the problems are, and you've described them very, very well here. I guess the main question a lot of people have, Levente, Magyar, is what can be done? What is the big stumbling block right now to be able to move forward? Because I think you were all here in the fall of 2016 when the EU came up with the Bratislava Declaration, and then as well after Brexit there was a lot of talk about, you know, everything that was just said now. We need to move forward, migration, Eurozone, all of this. Not that much has happened. What is the biggest obstacle? If you were to point to one thing, why is nothing really happening here?
Well, for example, one reason that I would point out is the fact that the Commission that has overtly declared itself as a political commission is pursuing an agenda in certain fields that is definitely not leading to a stronger Europe. The Commission right now is investing enormous energy and attention and time into the procedure against Poland on the basis of the so-called of Article 7, which we think is absolute nonsense, because there is no objective proof whatsoever that Poland has breached any of its obligations. And I could cite a number of similar issues that the Commission is extremely keen to invest energy into, and instead we think that the Commission should be the guardian of the treaty and not assume a political agenda. And I could bring about a lot of examples regarding my own country. All in all, I think that vis-a-vis Central Europe, the perception needs to be fundamentally changed. We are not a problem. We should be part of the solution. And there is a very clear sense that many of our Western friends are seeing us more and more as competitors, which is proof that we are getting stronger and which we should be reckoned with. Just a very few examples. The proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework is on.
We have less than 5 minutes, just so you know.
Right. They are
3 minutes,
trying to take the focal point from Eastern Europe in terms of the cohesion policy to the southern states. They say, let's give more money to those that have a higher unemployment rate, and this is not Central Europe anymore. Or the posting directive, or the fact that some social benefits are being cut in Austria or Germany that should be due to Central European citizens as well. I think that Central Europe should be taken as part of the solution and no energy should be wasted on sort of penalizing us for something that we haven't done.
That leads me to my last question, and I would love for you to answer it, Minister, which is this debate now. This is also a Slido question involving what's known as the MFF, which, as you know, is the European budget that's under discussion. And there has been a proposal to link the funds to what the Commission considers the respect for the rule of law. Will you oppose those moves and try to water this down if they do go forward with it?
To be extremely brief, I mean, you mean financial means from the Commission?
Yes.
Yeah, our general approach is that the state should decide how will any coherent fund or whatever be used, because the state knows, I would say, better than the central bureaucracy where it should go or not. So that's my extreme. But if I may, a couple of words to the previous question from the French ambassador. It's only natural that, and we are happy that France has a strong leader with a lot of energy and a lot of ideas. We have been always, all of us, I think, calling for big leaders in Europe. Where are the big leaders? So now there are some. So it's definitely good news, and we as Czech Republic don't have a Middenwendelijkheids complex that it's France and not the Czech Republic, not at all.
That's an insecurity complex.
Yeah. France and Germany, yes, why not? And we welcome it, and maybe even you probably know that we as Czech Republic want to work much more closer with France, for example. The important thing and the important point is that everything should be discussed in team. I mean, there can be a certain danger of imposing ideas, imposing steps, and to explain them, to talk about the prime ministers, to clarify all the aspects. then of course yes. And I keep my fingers crossed for Mr. President Macron to reform the social state in France. That would be really an achievement. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word. We had many, many questions that unfortunately we don't have time for. For everybody who's lucky enough to be invited to the GLOBSEC gala dinner, the buses will be leaving at the front of the hotel at 7:30. And again, the first session here tomorrow in this space will be at 9 o'clock. I would like to thank you, gentlemen, for your time and your frankness in this discussion, and look forward to continuing the debate throughout the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
I thank you.